Outside, the Wendigo is a mysterious monster, a creature from folklore that was made from our fears of hunger, each other, and the cold all put together. It is a spirit that takes over a person who has eaten human flesh, turning them into a monster whose hunger can never be satisfied. People are, of course, its favourite thing to eat. It's best to get out of the woods as soon as you can. Enjoy these stories of people who say they saw a Wendigo. When I was 10 years old, this happened. My grandfather owns a 200-acre property with a cabin up in Granby, Colorado. The property is surrounded by forest, and he lets my family go there. My sister and I were sleeping on the second floor of this cabin, where there are 2 beds in a window that look out over the property and the long driveway. We had just arrived after a long drive, and everyone in my family was asleep, but I woke up at 1:30 a.m. to let someone scream or howl. I ran to the window to see what was making the sound, but it seemed too far away for me to see what it was. So I didn't think much of it. About half an hour later, the sound of something scraping on the roof woke me up again. So I crawled under the bed. I was probably only under those covers for 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I heard a sudden thud on the ground. I finally got up the courage to look out the window, and when I did, I saw something I'll never forget. In the driveway, a huge, thin creature was hunched over. It had a long nose, but not as long as a dog's nose. It also had points on its head that looked like antlers. I grabbed a flashlight quickly to shine it on it, which was a bad idea. As soon as the flashlight hit it, it turned around and looked right at me. Then I saw its yellow teeth that looked rotten and its white eyes that were solid. We both looked at each other for about 10 seconds. Then, when the flash went off, it ran away very quickly. The next morning, it was gone. I was excited to tell my dad what I saw, but he told me I was probably just dreaming when I went outside. I saw big tracks that looked like hoof prints, but strangely, one of the toes had a claw at the end. That's for sure. This wasn't a normal deer or elk, and that wasn't the last time they met. My sister and I were following a group of cows 2 days later. My grandfather lived on his land. We were able to walk around the cows because they were so calm. They were in an open space with trees on all sides. But all of a sudden, when we were in the clearing, the cows got scared and ran into the trees. I saw the creature from 2 nights ago across from where we came into the clearing. It looked right at us. We were both frozen and cooked. Then the thing started to stand up, almost making it look like a person, and it looked like it was grinning at us like a person would if they wanted to scare you. Then, my sister and I ran back to the cabin as fast as we could. After that, neither my sister nor I went anywhere without a parent. Since that event happened 3 years ago, I've done some research, and I'm sure that what we saw was a window break. People say there is no Wendigo, so you can't really say that. Eyes in the Woods, a song by the J-Men, was filmed west of Vermont. This happened in the first week of August 2016, for some background. It must have been around the time of the Summer Olympics in Brazil. As a child grows up, he or she starts to worry that someone is watching them at night, or that there is a monster under their bed. Their parents would show them that there was nothing to be afraid of, reassure them that monsters don't exist, and that would be the end of it. I was one of those kids who would check under their bed and in their closet every night, before going to sleep to make sure nothing was there. I would go to sleep after making sure they were both safe. I grew up and stopped being afraid of monsters, but I never thought that fear would come back to haunt me. It was a bright summer day in West Dover, Vermont. Jay and Dan, 2 of my best friends, and I were on a weekend trip. All of us were 16 at the time, getting ready to start our junior year of high school. Our families are close, and Jay's family has invited the rest of us to go on a trip with them in 3 weeks. Jay's grandfather owns a cabin on the edge of the Dover County forest, right next to Cheney Brook. During the ski season, they would use the house when they wanted to ski on Mount Snow, which looks out over the valley. That August morning was especially cool, and by noon it was only about 66 degrees. My friends and I hike a lot, and the cabin is right next to a short trail that is no more than 6 miles long. Seeing this as a chance to leave our families behind, we brought a tent, sleeping bags, and a few other things that were important. Then they started down the trail. We went to the trailhead on the other side of the development and turned around at about 4 p.m. On the way back, we walked about 4 miles before setting up camp. We found a place to work on the side of the trail as it was getting dark. I used rocks I found in the area to make a fire pit, while Jay and Dan gathered sticks to make a fire. Around 7:30, we started the fire and started cooking the hot dogs we brought with us. We put on some music, told a few stories, and had a great time overall. Jay brought 3 beers from the cabin's fridge, and each of us opened one and drank it while we ate. Around 8:30, the fire started to go out, so we all went to get more sticks while I gathered sticks. Since my phone's Bluetooth was out of range for a few minutes, the speaker stopped playing music. I was able to listen to the sounds of nature for a while, but there were no sounds. There were no birds singing, no crickets chirping, and not even a breeze to make the leaves shake. There was no sound at all. I didn't feel good, so I went back to camp. I felt like I was being watched the whole way back, and a chill went down my spine. When I got back to the fire with my kindling, Jay had a confused look on his face. When I got back, he was looking the other way, and when he turned around to see me, he looked surprised. "How did you get so fast behind me? I just talked to you over there a second ago." When I came back, he pointed in the direction he had been looking, and I told him I wasn't over there. "So what exactly did you need help with? You kept saying help me." I was scared at this point. No one else was on the trail with us at that time of night, and Dan was only a few meters away from me when we were gathering sticks, so I knew he wasn't trying to mess with G. Dan came back, and then we all just decided it was nothing. We stopped playing music, and the sounds of the wild started up again. After an hour, we were all pretty tired. Dan went into the tent at this point, and Jay and I were about to put out the fire. Then it happened again. The woods went quiet and I got chills. Jay and I didn't like the vibe in the area, so we were hesitant to stay out, but we did. Both Jay and I quickly turned around. We were startled when a voice came from the tree line. "Help me, help me," the voice said again. The voice was deep and distorted, and it didn't sound right. Jay and I were on edge, and Dan had just come back out of the tent. "What did you hear?" He did so. We all kept looking into the tree line for about 15 more minutes, but whatever was there got quiet. Jay turned on the video camera he had brought with him and started filming the tree line to see if he could see anything. We heard a shriek all of a sudden. I had never heard a sound like that from an animal before. It started out sounding like an elk's call, but it had a human quality to it, like someone screaming. We all got back up. We heard the terrified scream again, but this time it was closer and louder. We all ran into the tent at once. I knew that whatever was out there wasn't an elk, because elk don't live in that area very often, and their calls are higher and more steady than this thing's. We heard the scream again, but this time it didn't sound as close as the first one. We all started to panic and look to each other for answers and a way out of this situation. Dan opened the tent door at this point. He left the tent and started to run. Jay and I looked at each other and then followed him down the path. We were running faster than we ever had before. We had all done cross-country before, so we knew how to pace ourselves. The only difference was that we had a lot of adrenaline in our bodies, which changed our minds. Instead of running at a steady pace, we forced ourselves to run as fast as we could. The sky was clear, and the moon was almost full, so its light was shining through the trees and lighting up the path. We could hear something rustling in the bushes behind us the whole time we ran, and about a mile from the trailhead, we heard it groan. We were all pretty tired, so we started to move more slowly. At this point, we heard something dark go by us in the brush. I'd never seen anything move that fast. We all stopped in our tracks. None of us knew what was going on, and I had never been so scared in my life. We saw a shadow dart across the trail in front of us, and when it went back into the brush, we ran again. As it followed us back to the cabin, it almost sounded like it was going around and around us. The 2-mile trail to the cabin only took us 12 minutes to walk, and as soon as we got to the trailhead, we started walking to the cabin. We finally got to the door, ran in, and locked it behind us. Then we ran around the cabin quickly to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. At that time, Jay's parents were the only ones awake. They didn't understand why we got back from our hike so early, but before they could ask us, there was a loud bang on the roof. Everyone grew quiet. There was a second thought, then 2 quick ones, all of which were getting closer and closer to the deck. The thuds turned into footsteps, and then the sound stopped. We all watched the deck to see what would jump down, But I don't think any of us expected to see what we did. A loud crash came from the deck, and there was a man who didn't look right in front of us. He only had skin and bones, so it looked like he hadn't eaten in months. His eyes were very pale and cloudy. Only a few strands of hair remained on the top of his head. His skin was wrinkled, and his silver hair made him look even older. He was completely naked, and his skin was as white as snow. He looked a lot taller than any other man I'd seen. I couldn't tell you for sure how tall he was, though. He was kneeling down. I realized at that moment that what was on the other side of the door was not a man at all. It didn't even look human. It looked right at us through the glass. It looks like pale, dead eyes that don't blink or move at all. We all looked right back at it and were shocked. It made a loud screech, then jumped easily back under the roof, and we never saw it again. We were all too scared to go to sleep, and when the sun came up, we felt safer than we had all night. Jay had recorded most of what happened, and even after listening to the tape several times, we still didn't know what to say. We never went back to get our stuff that weekend from the trail. We hiked back out a year later in the winter and found that some of it was still there. However, we did not go unarmed. I didn't have a lot of faith in the supernatural. Before that, I would often go urban exploring with the guys, and we'd see and hear things we couldn't explain. But it was easy to ignore that stuff. This was not the same. This happened. It could be felt. I was there and saw it for myself. I don't think I'll ever forget what I saw or be able to forget it. That day, we were lucky. Since then, it's hard for me to go back into those woods, and I'm afraid to stay at the cabin during ski season. Since then, Jay's grandfather has changed the locks, so I feel safer than I did before. But when I'm up there, I always have the feeling that someone is watching me. All over Vermont, people have seen things that are similar to what we saw. We found that it was the best way to describe a Wendigo. The Algonquin people made up the story of the Wendigo to keep their people from getting greedy and to scare away people who wanted to eat people. But every story has some truth to it. I'm not sure if what I saw was a Wendigo or not, but the descriptions and similarities are eerie, and whatever we might have seen still scares me to this day. I don't think I'll ever go back into those woods again. Maine, the summer of 2018 had come. I went to Maine to see my cousins. It was the only week of the year I could go there and spend the night with them. I made it to their family's cabin. Something didn't feel right, but I didn't think much of it the next day. My cousin Aidan and I decided to go on a bike ride. My other cousins would have joined us at some point, but they got too far ahead of us. Aidan and I felt like we were being watched at some point. We soon realized that nothing was happening in the woods around us. My stomach started to feel funny. So, even though Aidan seemed scared, I told him we should probably head back home. He said he didn't want to go yet, but I insisted, telling him I'd explain why later. Later, we started riding our bikes back to the lodge, but soon we had to slow down because we were tired. We were worn out. We heard the scream at that time. I looked back and saw a humanoid shape on all fours in the tree line, but that was all I could see before we had to force ourselves to keep going at full speed. There was no more to it. The rest of the trip went well, but Aidan and I stayed together and didn't take any more bike rides. From the Johnny Cheap location in New York, a Wendigo was seen. 7 months ago, this took place. I was riding my dirt bike behind my house after school. There is a large field that belongs to the town. As I rode along the edge of the forest, I heard a very loud scream. It sounded funny, so I laughed, but what I saw next scared me. I stopped my dirt bike to see what was going on. Initially, I really thought it was a very tall, skinny, homeless man who wasn't wearing any clothes, but then I saw that it was 8 feet tall. This was very strange, but when I got a closer look, I wished it really was just a crazy homeless person, because when it looked at me, it started to sound almost exactly like my dirt bike. I got on my bike and rode away so fast I didn't know what it was, and I still don't know what it was, but I don't want to be near it. My House of Horrors was built by RAJ 54 in British Columbia, Canada. This is just one of the many things that happened to me in the old house where I grew up. But it goes without saying that it's the worst thing that has happened to me since I was born, and we moved into this old house on the edge of my small village near this area. I've seen a lot of strange things, but at least you'd think you'd be safe in your own home, right? Wrong. Since I was a kid, My family has had a lot of strange things happen to us, like finding the car keys in the basement when my dad left them in the kitchen or house, or the landline phone ringing by itself and no one being there when we pick it up. You might think that's just a prank or someone being careless. But the thing is, no one ever goes in the basement, and these joke calls happened 5 times a week. It was too strange. Anyway, this little story happened when I was about 8 years old. My parents took a short trip without us kids and hired a babysitter to take care of us. They quickly got ready for their 3-day trip and kissed us goodbye before leaving. After they left, they said the babysitter would be there in 5 minutes. She knew that the spare key would be in the pot outside, so she could let herself in. They told me to stay out of trouble, and then they left. Me, my younger sister, and my older brother all sat down on the couch to watch TV, but then the doorbell rang. The babysitter showed up on time. We didn't understand why. So we looked at the little people and saw a girl who looked about 15 years old. We thought she was the babysitter, so we let her in and she said hi to everyone. Then we went back to watching TV. She sat down and didn't really care much about the TV, but she did kind of just stare at us. We had never done anything like this before. Our parents never left like this before. I thought she was just checking to make sure we were all okay. She said we should go outside and play hide and seek. It was getting dark, and since it was winter, it was pretty cold. Before we left, our parents told us not to go outside, especially at night or when it was this cold. But the babysitter made us leave. Then I realized something wasn't right. We started walking towards the door that led outside. When the doorknob started to move, we got scared and backed away. When we looked back, we saw that someone outside was now unlocking the door. We huddled together behind the couch while the babysitter told us not to make any noise and that she would go see what was going on. She left us with tears in our eyes. As we waited, we heard footsteps coming toward the living room, but there was only one pair. This means that the babysitter probably sent the person away. Right, from behind the couch, we got up and looked up. Now that we saw a woman, we were scared. She looked to be in her mid-20s, she said with a smile. So there you are. Then she said all of our names. We stared at her as if she were a monster. She turned around and asked, "What's wrong, guys?" They told me to meet them here at 8:30. So why are you looking at me that way? We just looked at her and didn't say anything until my older brother said, "The girl, our babysitter, was already here. How did she get there?" The woman looked at us and said, "No, I'm Becky and I'm your babysitter." I looked at her and said, No, this girl is watching over us." When you came in, she went to see who was trying to open the door. She gave us a crazy look and asked, "What are you talking about?" "I'll watch your kids." I think we were all a little lost. I tried to tell her what had happened, but she didn't listen. Instead, she called our parents and asked if they had a different babysitter schedule. They said no, and when she told them why, they asked why. Both of them said they'd be back in the morning. Then he told us to close and lock all the windows and doors, after making sure there was no one else there. After that, we didn't know what to do, so we just went to sleep. That night, someone was tapping on my window when I woke up. When I looked out into the moonlight, I was horrified to see the silhouette of a girl standing by the window. It was much thinner than it had been. I tried to sleep while hiding under my blanket, but I couldn't because I knew it was watching. I never saw that thing again after the first time. I don't know if it was something strange. Maybe a werewolf was trying to trick us into being eaten. I only know that I don't want it to happen again. Wendigo, an Oak Indian from age 8 and see where Scotland is. A few years ago, my scout group spent 3 weeks at Oak Engine. Nothing awful, just a simple camp. But it was up to me and a few others to go deep into the woods and set up camp. The first few days were fun, but one night at 12 o'clock, the tent flap flew open all by itself. There was a cold wind that smelled strongly of copper, and then all was quiet in the forest. The next morning, we started heading back, which would take a few more days. Before we left, we saw strange footprints and saw that some of the trees had their bark torn right off. On the way back, we heard the voice of my friend, who we'll call Mike, to protect his privacy. Mike's voice came from about 100 feet into the woods. He was trying to get help, but there was something wrong. His voice was kind of flat, as if he had forgotten how to talk. We caught a glimpse of something at that time. Something was hiding in the bushes and calling out Mike's name. We ran away as fast as we could and got far enough away to feel safe. We set up camp again, and when we woke up the next day, we were back at the cabin. We didn't tell anyone because we knew they wouldn't believe us. I told my classmates that I was going to OK Engine a game with my school, but only one of them listened. The Monster of 4th Street by Squidney 22 location, Manitoba, Canada. About a year ago, in December, this happened. In my small town in Manitoba. At the time, I was 15 years old. I won't say the name of the town because it's private, but to give you an idea, there are a lot of farms and woods on the edges of the town. We lived on 4th Street, which wasn't too far from town's centre, but we were far enough away that you could see the woods from our backyard, which was about 50 feet away. I've seen deer, coyotes, and other animals out there. We put up a fence there so that our 2 German shepherds wouldn't run away and get lost. One night, my sister Jade and my brother Liam were at my house with me. My mum worked nights, so I was the babysitter. I had just put Liam to bed when my sister came crying and screaming through the front door. She had just taken the trash out. I tried to make her feel better. She was only 12, so seeing her cry like this was pretty shocking. She wasn't afraid of the dark, and she hadn't been for a long time. After I could understand her a little, I asked her what was wrong, and she gave me the most worried look she'd ever given me. She told me about it, a big animal with pale, wrinkly skin and almost no fur. It looked like it was 6 feet tall and stood on 4 thin, long legs. She said that it looked like a deer because it had antlers, but she couldn't see the face because it was facing the other way. I felt sick to my stomach because what she said could have been a bull elk with a disease called chronic wasting disease. When an animal has the disease, it loses control of its brain and turns into a zombie-like creature. I had to make sure what she saw was real, so I could get in touch with my mum and have her control the game and kill it. I quickly put on my coat and ran to the end of our driveway. I was given the trash bag. She had gotten rid of the smell. It was horrible and smelled like rotting meat and who knows what else. I had never smelled this before. She did take it outside, so it might not have come from the trash. After that, I looked up to my right. Down the road, about 60 feet away, I saw the ugliest thing I had ever seen. It was a big grey animal with thin spots that was stumbling across the road in the snow. Just like she said, it had antlers and long, skinny legs. Even though I felt bad for it, I wanted to get a better look at it to make sure it wasn't a sick elk. I needed to know what to tell the game wardens to keep an eye out for. I walked 10 steps down the pavement from my driveway and stopped under a streetlight. What if it attacks me? I thought to myself, it turned its head slowly, and what I saw will never leave me. Its face was pale, and where its eyes should have been, there were black holes. It had cuts for nostrils and a flat nose. It wasn't a typical animal. It opened its mouth, which looked like a person's, to show sharp, jagged teeth, then let out the most painful scream you could. I couldn't move because I was so scared, and it was coming toward me. I turned around and ran back to my house as fast as I could. My feet couldn't keep up with how fast I was running. When I got inside and slammed the door, Jade was in the living room with the dogs hiding together on the couch. No matter what it was, the dogs knew it was dangerous. I told Jade to close the blinds and lock the doors and windows, which she did. She stopped dead in front of the window because that thing was now in front of our house. My heart dropped. Were we going to get it? Would it follow me or Jade while we walked the dogs in the evening? Would we make it through tonight? We all ran to Liam's room and laid down with him. The dogs, Jade and I. We felt like we had been there for hours. And then we did fall asleep. The sound of my phone ringing woke me up. When my mum got home from work, she was waiting outside and I let her in. I thought about telling her what we saw, but I didn't because I knew she didn't believe things like that. She would never accept what we said. Nobody else would. For one, you should believe what I saw. I'm sure it was a werewolf. Since then, I haven't seen it again, and I hope I never will. My sister and I were the only ones who knew the story, but now you do too. Deep Woods Wendigo sighting in New York, the city of your worst nightmares. I went on an expedition that took me deep into the forest. It was in the High Peaks Wilderness, which is part of the Adirondacks. I went with a friend I called Trail Master and a friend whose name is the trails here are beautiful mountain ranges that go on for miles and miles through dense woods. This is what it means to be both beautiful and dangerous. We must have gone just under 3.5 miles on foot by the end of the day. The person in charge of the trail found a good place for us to sleep for the night. As the sun was about to set, a light breeze was coming from the northeast. We still had at least 2.5 hours of daylight. Trailmaster together, and Wood and Nymph went to a nearby creek to get water. I helped set up the 3 tents where we would sleep for the night. Nymph came running back to camp without the canteens all of a sudden. When I heard her panting and saw her get down on her knees in the dirt, I was amazed. I know Nymph, and I can tell you that it's not like her to be panting like that. I tried to keep her calm while I tried to find out what was going on. I asked what's wrong. Trailmaster had just come back with a bundle of sticks. He asked, "What's wrong with her?" The Knife told us this. Just as she started filling the canteens, she found a good spot near the creek. The sound of a twig breaking is a common one. The noise was loud enough to wake her up. On the other side of the creek was where the sound came from. She didn't pay much attention to it because she figured it was just a scared animal. Then she heard it again, but this time it was much louder and closer. This time, it caught her off guard, and she had to look in the direction where the sound had come from out of instinct. She then heard a sound like a male white-tailed deer grunting, which she could hear. She felt like she was in danger. She felt like she didn't belong there. Then she felt like she was being watched. It made her feel very uneasy, almost to the point where she felt lost. She stood up and took a few steps back. She then saw something that made her feel cold. On the other side of the creek, partly hidden by trees, she saw a pair of antlers and what looked like hind legs. From behind the trees, she could hear a loud grunt. It looked like a deer to her. But then, her sense of right and wrong kicked in, and she thought to herself, what kind of deer around here doesn't mind being so close to a person? When the grunts got louder and started to sound almost threatening, she ran back to camp. Trailmaster asked, "Are you sure about this story?" There was a hint of doubt in his voice. Knife didn't even answer him. Instead, you should give him a cold look. Most likely it was a deer. Trailmaster asked, "Are you afraid of a deer?" I, on the other hand, thought the best of Nymph. Even in her current condition, Nymph could tell what she saw, heard, and felt. It was her instincts and senses that told her to leave. Trailmaster decided to go to where Nymph had been and look around. Nymph didn't want to go back, so she didn't. So Trailmaster went off by himself. Nymph and I stayed at camp while I thought about whether or not we should move. I decided to wait for the Trailmaster to return before making a decision. When the Trailmaster got to where the creek used to be, and this is what he saw. On the other side of the creek, there were knife-like tracks leading toward our camp, and empty canteens were strewn all over the ground. There were animal prints that looked like a deer. The only problem was that the prints were too close together, and something seemed to be missing or wrong. Usually, a deer walks on all fours, but when the Trailmaster looked more closely, he saw that this deer was probably walking on 2 legs. The prints made a path, and the path seemed to come out of the woods somewhere. It went on for a few meters, stopped at the other side of the creek, turned around, and went back the way it came. They came from without being the same as the first set. Later, Trailmaster did say that it scared him a little, and made him feel uneasy. After half an hour, he came back to camp with our field canteens. Even if we wanted to move our camp, it would be hard because the sun was already going down. Forward, 2.5 hours. Our tents had been set up. Even though the campfire was lit and dinner was being made, we decided that one of us should stay awake while the others slept. At the time, it was just too dark to move. There were nymphs right next to my tent, and there was a good reason for that trail. Master is a light sleeper, so his tent was set up about 5 am away from ours. However, we had to move it closer to us. We set up a trap around the outside of our camp. If someone tripped the wire, the trap would go off. It was nothing more than some tin cans and fishing line, but it worked. I don't blame Knife for not talking much more about what happened that night. Even though I told her I'd keep her on a safe path, she was still scared. The things that Masters found at the creek only made things worse. I felt uneasy when I thought about what Knife saw and what Trailmaster found. We were in the dark, and the woods were quiet and scary. We didn't know what was out there. It made me feel uneasy. The only sound loud enough to drown out sudden, faint sounds in the distance was the sound of wood being burned. That night, your mind can play tricks on you. It seemed like there was always a dark figure standing a few meters from our camp, just out of the light's reach. Every rustle in the bushes made us think that something was trying to sneak up on us. Every sound came from somewhere. Those sounds are what make a night in the woods interesting, so mysterious or scary. Trailmaster and Nymph were sleeping, and I was keeping an eye out. The nighttime sounds of crickets were nature's lullaby, and they were almost enough to put me to sleep. When everything stopped, I realized I'd been sleeping for a while on watch. Knife told me that she had woken up in the early morning. She found me and Trailmaster around 4:00. Out there was a bad smell in the air outside of the tent. She said it smelled like rotting meat. It looked like a body that had been dead for a few weeks and was already beginning to break down. She said it was that bad. Nymph woke us both up because the smell scared her. It was clear that we hadn't smelled anything. I checked the perimeter hours before and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. We did feel like we were being watched, which was pretty scary in and of itself. The smell went away after an hour, but only because we made noise. It was only in the morning. About 2 hours later, we saw what I thought were deer tracks just a few meters away. The Trailmaster confirmed that these were the same ones found by the creek. Trailmaster said it was probably just a random deer, though. I thought it was strange how far apart the prints were. They looked like they were walking back and forth for a while, and then they took off straight up. Then Tailmaster said that it looked like there was a pair of hoof prints missing. It was only the back legs. Again, there was no doubt about it. There was no doubt that a deer left those prints. The zigzag pattern of the footprints, which looked a lot like how people walk on trails, made me feel uneasy. Master was tempted to go in the opposite direction of the footprints. Knife was laughing so hard that he didn't mean to do that. She said that the whole thing seemed strange and even spooky, something that looked like a deer. Weird prints and whatever it was that smelled so bad seemed to be following us, and we didn't want to meet it. I told Trailmaster to put it out of his mind. We should keep going instead. I said, 3rd time's the charm. Let's not be there. We moved around most of the day. Still, Nymph was scared. Trailmaster didn't feel the same way, so he decided to go check on the prints even though he seemed fine. Nymph was right when she said that she thought the thing was still following us. I told her to hold on. I don't know why she thought that, but I didn't question her. If that thing was following us, it probably didn't get too close. On the other hand, nothing would be scarier than to suddenly turn around and see a pair of antlers sticking out from behind a tree, or for one of us to be singled out in the middle of nowhere. Despite everything that had happened, we made it to our destination without getting hurt. All seemed quiet. All feelings of fear and the feeling of being watched went away. As we left the area, the air seemed to get lighter. Maybe we were in its territory, so it felt the need to let us know it was there, but we didn't feel like we were in danger anymore. Nothing else happened that is worth talking about. I think that trip went well for us, no matter what. Maybe it chose to leave us alone, or maybe it was just interested. Just put, we don't know. I'd like to think that it's still out there, waiting for the next group of hikers to go off the trail and into the vast unknown. Take care in the forest. Strange thing happened to Hussein in the woods, but no one knows where. This happened in January 2019, when a few of my friends and I decided to spend one night camping in the woods about 30 miles from my house. We were on winter break, but we didn't have anything fun to do. So we decided it would be best to go camping and have some fun. It took us a few hours to get where we were going. The time was now 1 p.m. It was a nice place with a lot of greenery, and we found a clearing quickly where we could set up camp during the day. We saw a couple of deer and thought the place was great. We were having the best time ever until the sun started to go down. The place started to creep me out. At this point, I should say that there were 4 of us, including me, and we all agreed that it was time to set up the tents. We went to sleep around midnight. My friend Rick and I were in the same tent, and Sean and Yusuf were in the same tent. Before I fell asleep, I remember having a short talk with Rick. He told me that this made him feel weird, like eyes were watching us. I told him he was being silly and that there was nothing to worry about. Then we went to sleep. I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. When I checked my phone, I saw that it was 2:08. I didn't bother telling Rick that I was going to the bathroom. I got out of my tent and went to the edge of the woods to do what I needed to do. Then I noticed that it was very quiet for some reason. There are no sounds of nature near me. I didn't think much about it until after the event. When I got back, Rick was still sleeping, so I laid down gently and went back to bed. Right, just before I fell asleep, I saw the outline of a person standing in the middle of our clearing. I first thought it was one of my friends who also needed to use the bathroom, but whoever it was just stood there without moving a muscle. I soon woke up from my sleepiness and got ready. When I looked at the figure more closely, I saw that it was too tall to be any of my friends or even a normal person. I noticed all of a sudden that its hand was very thin and long. They looked like they had no hair and were a little bit bent over. Whoever they were not in our group. I woke Ricky up quickly and quietly. He asked what the problem was. I told him to look outside the tent, and sure enough, the person was still there. He saw it too, Ricky. We thought it was a drunk man or someone crazy breaking into our campsite in the middle of the night. He did something stupid after that. He pulled out his phone and got out of the tent. In a panic, I ran after him. I was about to tell him not to do it, but it was too late. He shined the torchlight on the person, or what I thought was a person. What I saw next is something I will never forget. It was already facing us, almost as if it was waiting for us to do something. At least 9 feet tall, it was bent over in the back. It was so thin that it looked like it hadn't eaten in years. It had very long hands that almost reached the ground. It had claws for hands and skinny legs, and its skin was as white as snow. It had orange eyes that almost seemed to glow, and its mouth was full of sharp teeth. It looked like it was smiling. When Rick screamed, the thing did the same. Sian and Yusuf ran out of their tents to see what was going on. It kept running away on all fours into the woods. We just stood there, scared to death. When we could move again, we quickly packed up our things and went home. But we heard that scream all night from different places in the forest. We put everything in the big SUV and just threw ourselves in it. Then we pushed the gas to the floor and drove away. But those orange eyes, Lakeside Nightmare from Cali 2025 location Colorado, are something I will never forget. It's hard for me to tell you this, but something in my head says I should. I was 19 and it was a beautiful late summer day. I was a very daring woman who went on camping trips every year to a quiet lake in the woods of Colorado. My 2 cousins, Cass and Elle, were also big fans of being outside. When it was time for our annual camping trip, I remember being so excited. Cass had a small camper with 4 beds that we usually slept in. We met at the usual place and began the 3-hour drive. We got there and we can't wait to see what we find. We were the only ones at a site. Right, lucky. I remember how beautiful it was, with tall pines and a lake that was so beautiful it took my breath away. We quickly set up our campfire. It was strange the first night. We could hear some kind of animal in the distance yelling, but we didn't let it bother us. When we went outside the next morning, just beyond the camper, we saw huge hoof prints. I mean, they were bigger than my whole hand. We thought it was a big elk roaming around the campsite. So we went about our day as usual, but when the sun started to go down behind the trees, I started to feel uneasy. I didn't understand why we cooked dinner over the fire and then went for a walk. We started to notice that all the nightlife had stopped making noise. This made me feel even more uneasy because I'd always been taught that when animals stop making noise, it's because they're afraid of a predator nearby. But I shook my head because I thought I was just trying to scare myself. What we heard next is still stuck in my mind because it came from trees that were too close. We heard an awful shriek. We all screamed because it was so loud, even if we weren't easily scared. We all looked at each other with wide eyes and didn't move for a second as we tried to figure out what we had just heard. Sounds of something getting closer. We noticed the line of trees. Even though the fire was bright, we couldn't see past the trees. I had a sudden sense of dread, and I almost felt sick. I felt cold all over, and I could hear heavy breathing coming from those dark trees. We were definitely not the only ones moving quickly. We all ran into the camper, almost tripping over our own feet, and Feral shut and locked the door. We all stood there in silence, waiting for whatever was out there to move, and it did. The sound of its heavy steps got closer, and I felt like I was going to cry. But then it stopped. Nothing but the sound of the nearby water gently lapping at the shore and the crack of a still burning fire. Al said in a whisper, "Maybe it's gone." I walked over to the doorway window and moved the curtains out of the way. What I saw standing there has made me fear the woods. Some kind of animal always stood right next to our camper. It looked like an elk, but it stood on 2 legs, hunched over, and had brown fur that was all matted together. It had long arms with fingers that ended in claws. I gasped, and it seemed to have heard me because it snapped its head towards the camper so fast it made me wince. The light of the fire was being blocked, so I could barely make out the face, but I remember that it was terrible and looked like a deformed elk. I closed the curtain fast and nearly jumped away, bumping into Cass. We could hear it moving around the camper, now bumping into it occasionally, causing the whole thing to shake. Objects fell over, and we began to panic. Cass grabbed one of our phones from the counter and began to dial the emergency line, but out here the signal was dodgy at best. Then whatever it was attacked the front of the camper. I was so scared that I will never forget the sound of metal groaning. We all went to the only room in the camper that didn't have windows, the tiny bathroom. We stayed there for hours, holding each other and crying as the whole thing shook violently, and the sound of metal breaking was so loud it hurt my ears. Then, like a light switch, it all stopped. No more metal crunching, growling, or anything else. I don't remember going to sleep, but when I woke up, Cass and Elle were just starting to move around. We left the bathroom and headed for the door. It took me a few tries because my hand was shaking so much. When we went outside in the morning, the light made us feel a little safer. But all of that safety was broken. When we came around to the front of the camper, it was a twisted mess of metal and wires. Whatever it was, it had torn the engine apart. I couldn't help but think that whatever it was doing, it knew what it was doing. It tried to stop us from getting away. But that day, we got lucky because another group of campers had chosen to camp on our side of the lake, and they drove me into town. We got home that day before dinner. Be careful out there because myths and legends may be more true than you think, but don't be too scared. You won't turn into a Wendigo as long as you don't get too hungry. You're probably curious about why I'm putting salt on my skin. There's nothing wrong with giving something a little more flavor. Why do I look so delicious? Well, that's what my mother told me to do. Why do you want to bite me? Only a mosquito was on my arm. You frightened me. But if you keep that up, you could become a Wendigo. Good night. If you liked this episode, like, share, leave a comment and subscribe. You can tell us your story at darknessprevails.org if you have one. You can also support the show by going to Patreon, Darkness Prevails, or checking out our merchandise at Teespring. Come store us Darkness Prevails. Also, don't forget to check out our sponsor Purple and text DUT 284,882 to get a free pillow. As usual, here are my 5 favourite early comments from the last usual video, which was about 10 sightings of huge monsters. Austin Crystala says, "Yeah, now that's how you make a first comment, ladies and gentlemen." Little Wolfweb says you should do stories about Mormon missionaries. Anyone who just walks up to your door out of the blue is a creepy story in the making. So sure, I'm sure there are some strange tales out there. Bob Z is not so quiet, he says. Yes, please do. It was a great idea for a video. I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but there you have it, and I hope you really liked it. Peter Yang says, I don't want to meet a mean giant. I want to meet a nice one. I'll take these stories to bed with me. Did you really go to sleep with these stories? Or was that your way of saying that you were physically drawn to these stories? And when it comes to giants, bigger is better. There's no such thing as a bad giant because that's a lot of flesh to love, Jericho. Hacking says that I have a very large monster. Do you want to try to guess? Do you try to forget about the demons that barely fit in your closet after that terrible thing that happened to you? But you can't, and it keeps you up at night until it starts to affect how well you do at work, making you worry even more about getting fired. I think that's pretty big. If that's the case, you might just be talking about what's in your pants. Congratulations. So, this Darkness Prevails episode has come to an end. But don't worry, because soon there will be more scary stories. So stay tuned here until we talk again. The credit goes to my awesome patrons who keep giving me money. Remember to stay safe and creepy out there, because this world is a strange place.